Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Shipra. How are you?
Fine, sir. Fine. It's very new topic for me, Kashmiri Shaivism, but I'm privileged to hear him.
Right. I know he's a very, very good scholar.
He's,
very nice.
very rigorous philosopher.
Right. And one of the important things is that this year they have put the Natya Shastra into the world memory.
Yeah.
In the world memory of text, they put the Bhagavad Gita and the Natya Shastra, and Abhinav then becomes even more important.
Natya Shastra.
And Swastik, there was one person who was actually wanting to do something on Tagore and Natya Shastra. Is there some writing on that?
I have to inquire a bit.
Some references to Rabindranath and Natya Shastra.
Yes, I have to inquire a bit. But there should be some work on that, because Tagore did a lot of work on theatre.
Yeah, he did. But because what I was thinking, I don't know, Tagore does very little of scholastic referencing. But I thought that, the idea of creativity and that would go well with the idea of Maheshwar. Huh?
Yes, the way Tagore puts it, it's actually, I used to think it was close to Kashmir Shaivism, because this other being absorbed into the I, and it repeats
and
over there.
Right, and the ever effulgent creativity defining very nature of it. Although Tagore is actually, because of his history, more an Advaitin. And so
he was that Brahma Samaj Advaitin, yes, from there. He
So,
also has influences of Gaudiya.
Yeah,
Because,
so I was wondering that, that would be an interesting thing, that the static Brahma and the dynamic Maheshwar, because as an artist, it would the Kashmir Shaivism would suit him better.
Yes, even I think so. Even when my mother does some productions, it's very close to Tagore. Like when they do it, when I see it, recently she did something and I was like, okay, it's just like Kashmir Shaivism. When we work on it, we explain it to them using Tagore.
And
so
the
I don't
desire
think
to
much have worked on it.
Yeah, and the idea of wanting to come back again and again in the world is more consonant with Kashmir Shaivism than with the Advaiti of Shankar types.
It's very similar with our Tantric philosophy.
Yeah.
I don't find Tantra so close to Shankaracharya.
Yes. Yeah. I know most of us find Shankaracharya to be the most sanitized version.
We are starting now, sir.
Yeah, let us start now. Yeah.
Let us start, huh? Okay. So, namaste and warm welcome to all the esteemed scholars and professors. As we are celebrating Shiva month, Shravan month, which is dedicated to Lord Shiva, I thought that one aspect of Shaivism, that is Kashmiri Shaivism, should be explored in our cafe. And Kashmiri Shaivism is one of the key aspects of Indian philosophy. So we got the opportunity to listen on this particular area of Indian philosophy from a wonderful and dedicated scholar of Kashmiri Shaivism, Mr. Swastik Banerjee. Swastik Banerjee is currently pursuing his doctoral research in philosophy at the University of Calcutta. His thesis titled "The Problem of Self in the Anuttara Trika Philosophy of Kashmir, with special reference to toKṣemarāja, an Exegetical and Critical Study, explores the non-dualistic ontology of the Trika tradition through a philosophical lens. He is a recipient of the University Research Fellowship and the Ishwar AshramTrust Fellowship.
People who took the boards are taking the.
Kindly mute yourself. Yeah. And Swastik is a recipient of the University Research Fellowship and the Ishwar AshramTrust Fellowship, and holds a first rank in MA Philosophy from University of Madras. And Swastik will be speaking on self, other, and the paradox of devotion in Kaula Tantra, an examination through Pratyabhijñā philosophy. Kaula Tantra is also known as Kula, which is a branch of tantric tradition within Hinduism, and which emphasizes on the union of Shiva and Shakti through rituals and symbolism. It is characterized by its association with cremation ground, where ascetic practices, and sometimes it includes transgression of social norms. Swastik will be explained in a much larger and vast area, aspect. So, not taking much of your times, I request Mr. Swastik to start the talk and grace the cafe. Over to you, Swastik.
Yeah,
Thank you. So, my presentation today, I think it's echoing somewhere. It's better to be mute. Yeah, thank you. So my presentation today is titled Self and the Other, the Paradox of Devotion in Kaula Tantra, Examination through Pratyabhijñā Philosophy. Now the word Pratyabhijñā, usually used as recognition, is the philosophical stand of Trika. Kaula Tantra is the ritualistic and the practice stand of Trika. When we go into Trika, the higher parts, it's using the word Anuttara Trika Kaula. They usually use the word that Trika is something beyond Kaula, but it is the union of Shiva and Shakti. So basically, Kula and Takula, the unified consciousness and the consciousness manifesting as the world. So the Kaula, so this tantric practices which we find alive right now, the Kaula tantric practices, that is basically the tantric practices of most predominantly in the region of Bengal, especially in Kalikula and Srikula, the way you find in Tirthanath and other lineages, are traditions which are practicing Kaula chant. So the problem that I will be addressing today is in all these systems, the ultimate goal or the doctrine that they propose is something of non-duality. Like it's a form of Advaita where there is no second to be seen, or there is only one reality in either way you put it. Now at the same time, when we talk of non-duality, it also refers that non-duality implies identification. And when we talk of identification, there are a few problems that come up in Bhakti, because when we talk about a tantric culture or a tantric being defined as that culture which without taking the Vedic rituals are developing their own rituals independent of the Vedas. So all the ritual texts, including Vaishnava and all the other, and Kaula Tantra being those of the non-dual Divyachara Tantras, where Advaita is being primarily focused on. But even there, we find ritualism, puja, and bhakti to be very important. And in the end also, we find the goal of returning again and again to perform bhakti to the goddess or to Shiva, whatever form of divine they're taking. The problem here is two, and that's where the paradox starts. So in any form of bhakti, we have to presume a sort of duality, where the self, as in the individual, and the other is seen as the divine, to the devoted to the God, is seen to be initially separate. Even if the relation is taken, if we say that they're both one, the question of either servitude or love or any relationship somewhere collapses. Okay, so the problem arises is how can devotion make sense within a system where there is nothing other to the self? And the second problem arises, if the self is already Shiva, it is given already, then why engage in any practice at all? So these are the primary two problems that we see. Because ultimately, and this argument I will be answering through Pratyabhijñā philosophy. Okay, so let us get to the background. So how can bhakti, which presupposes duality of subject and object, devotee and God, serve as a means of non-dual liberation, including jnana mukti, because they are accepting Paurusha and Buddha jnana. And this Paurusha jnana has this part of bhakti very important. Thus, devotion reinforces the very structure of duality that non-dual metaphysics seeks to dissolve. So these arguments I will be developing from Utpaladeva's Srivastotravali and taking into consideration the commentary of KSAS, and I have selected only a few of the Stotravalis and extracted certain arguments from that. So namely the first one, the second one, the 8th one, the 9th one, and the 10th. So now I would argue, and taking the very basic, that even for a moment, as he puts it, if the Lord enters one is flooded with joy. At the point of Samavesha, where the realization happened that I am not separate, it is flooded with joy. And this movement of joy that comes up is in fact the Lakshana of the bhakti that they're giving, the outpour of the ecstatic joy. And here there is a play of seeing other as not separate, like oneself as not separate from the other. So how is it? Let us bring in the analogy of a river merging into the ocean. So when a river merges into the ocean, just at the point, in Bengali we call it Mohana. So at the point the river merges into the ocean, you don't find the river as sweet, and it becomes one with the salty sea. So it loses the character of itself and becomes one with the. So it loses the character of its sweetness and becomes one with the ocean's character, yet maintaining the point of difference. So does for the devotee. Because in absorption, all the sense of separateness merges into the limitless consciousness. So this is the analogy that I have taken in the background. Okay. And now I am going into Bhakti Vilasa Tantra. So the opening verses in the establish that the Shiva is one. And given the argument that the Shiva is one, just a minute. Shiva is present in all experiences, and the external and the mundane. So when we argue that, so separation, when we are trying to establish, taking that consciousness is the only reality, any sort of separation where it is said, like if someone says that something is external to consciousness, it would basically bring up the problem of impossibility of knowing, because anything outside consciousness cannot ever be experienced at all. Even that which is non-existent becomes a part of consciousness, and this consciousness is identified with Shiva. So separation is considered to be a perceptual error and not an ontological reality. So this bhakti does not arise from the distance, but from the attunement of what is already there. So when one has the experience of this Ananda Rasavindu, this is when this experience of unity is taken up. Okay. So they're talking, then the proximity of Shiva is what, with the minimal effort, the entire thing collapses. So the Aishwarya is what they start experiencing. So when this happens, when you have this Ananda Rasa, the collapse is not something that happens in external world, but it is an inward collapse of duality. So it is the devotee's consciousness, initially oriented outward in the search of the divine, turns inward and collapses into the distinction between interior and exterior. This culminates in the realization of all spatial orientation and are themselves constructs projected by consciousness, which is Shiva. The directional structure of experience, looking out toward God or inward towards self, dissolve when the perceiver recognizes their own appearance as the very field where all these distinctions arise. This does not entail the mystical quietism of a radical clarification. The duality of subject and object is said to be the play of vikalpa. They appear as vikalpas. And the bhakti becomes the practice of resting this undivided field of appearance into one. The next question comes into the universal devotion. So the question here is the extent of bhakti. So the verses extend that the scope, the very Utpaldeva asserts that longing for the divine, the very question of longing, because the problem comes that if we long for something, it must be taken to be something external to the person. Now, the argument is given that Utpaldeva asserts that the longing for the divine is not an analomy, but the underlying impulse of Ichcha Shakti of all creatures, from inert matter to the highest deities. This universality is not a rhetorical flourish, but 1 minute. Rhetorical clarity. Where did I go? But basically it argues that if we say that something Ichha Shakti, when we argue the point of Ichha Shakti, the inert matter, what appears to be other, is the primary will to manifest oneself as the other. Because in Bhakti, the identification happens within Shiva. So this Ichha Shakti does not really appear to be different, but an impulse of projecting oneself even in the established, while being established in that absolute bliss, to project oneself as lover, to much like a Leela relation where a person intentionally projects the other, or rather where they experience themselves within Shiva, who comes down. Then comes. Now, there are certain objections that are put up against the question of bhakti. So first, the objection raised is that bhakti relies on the conceptual and linguistic distinction between the devotee and the deity. And this objection, in response, the hymn asserts that the true devotion culminates into samavesha, inner absorption in seva, whereby all conceptual constructs, which is vikalpa, inner or outer, subject and objects, thinker and thought are dissolved. This is the level of Visranti. In non-conceptual realization, which is not the result of analytical negation, but a direct experiential disclosure of Shiva's as one's own self, the act of devotion becomes the medium through which vikalpa is annihilated and replaced by anubhava, the direct realization. The next problem that is set, that when we say the word Shiva, even this word auspicious, there's an elaborate discussion on Matrika Tattvas, being all the letters being manifested out of this one primary consciousness, and that's the mother which is revealing it. So Utpal assumes that in every experience, when we bring about the experience of joy or sorrow or anything, every word that is seen, Rateyam Shivetalam, this is the word they use, everything that we see, it may be a insult, it may be a joy, it may be a sorrow, anything, it all ultimately affirms that the single word Shiva, through grammatically and acoustically minimum radiates itself in all forms of words that are manifested. So it is Shiva which is being experienced in all the words in language, and not the individual, because they're all coming from Matrika, and Matrika being the ground of Shiva. So is devotion merely a psychological emotion? Is the next problem that they raise, because you have these emotions of other things. And the objection of reduction of devotion into a mere psychological emotion is rejected by arguing that a mere psychological emotion, which is coming from the mind, is actually going into an inner transformation. It dissolves into consciousness, and it is not a psychological emotion, but a play of the rasas of the consciousness, which manifests itself in its multiplicity. Thus, it is not a psychological emotion, but a revelation of its own consciousness which happens. So even the elaborate arguments goes that the challenges of the common assumptions that devotion is simply an emotional state like longing, love, longing, and attachment arising within the empirical mind, instead of being depicted as transcognitive and ontological shift marked by the cessation and mental immutation, shankha, agitation. The analogy offered is that the stilled ocean is significant. Just as the ocean once agitated by waves become the mirror of the undisturbed depth, the devotee's consciousness is stilled in the dualistic projections and emotional revelations, while being reflecting the very essence of Shiva. The identity of the devotee here also becomes ambiguous, like whether there is a devotee separate from the Shiva and whether the Shiva is the devotee where. The question, who is the devotee, itself loses traction, because the act of devotion itself culminates into the effacement of a separate ego. But there is but again, there is no longer a distinct bhakta relating to an external deva. Rather, it means only an experiential unity of bliss ananda, where the differentiation has subsided. The devotion, therefore, is not an emotion in an usual sense, but a sense of an alignment where the devotee no longer feels the devotee no longer feels devotion, but devotion is an expression of the joy. Now the argument comes that whether or not devotion ultimately leads to liberation, or whether devotion is a blockage to liberation. And what is the state of liberation when it comes to a question of devotion? Because when we are talking about experiencing the oneness, how can devotion be considered into liberation? So the word of charvana is used. So unlike the progressive ascetic parts where you have purification and meditation and the understanding of the world as unreal and the Ishwara as a upadhi, which is ultimately to be discarded into a static Brahman, here the argument is given the realization of a dynamic reality of consciousness itself involves the metaphor of charvana, like chewing. Charvana is the act of chewing. This charvana is the chewing of rasana. Example can be brought from charvana of pana, where all the flavors are coming in, and you are enjoying the flavors of sorrow and others which are coming in. And this challenges the idea that liberation is a distant event, but instead a spontaneous outcome of absorption. Now the question comes, because is devotion inferior to yogic powers? The argument is the traditional yogic attainments like anima, laghima. Now this is also an objection which is brought by the mantravadins who believe that yogic powers and prayoga is the main thing. So anima and laghima and other things, when it comes to the death, they really does not really make much value, because they're only affecting when one is alive. And they're actually treated as secondary limbs to devotion, while devotion itself is not for the sake of power, but it is itself power as Shakti, as it is the experience of being one with Shakti. Now the argument further goes that being one with Shakti, you are becoming one with Shiva, who is the lover of Shakti, and becoming lover of Shakti as in a lot of things of aesthetics come over here, and I've not really explored those yet. So it's like the being in united with Shakti while appearing to be different as an experience. So it's the power itself which reveals all this siddhis. So it's not the siddhis that are going to be the outcome, but siddhis are a natural spontaneous manifestation. So they do not become the first thing. Now the question is, what is the role of the mind when it comes to liberation? Because it can be argued that everything is ultimately going to be in the mind. So the Utpaladeva presents a powerful argument considering that the nature of the mind and its relation on liberation through bhakti. Conventionally, within the Indian philosophical systems, the certain strands like Shankha, Yoga, Advaita, Vedanta, Manas is seen as the principal locus of bondage. It is the site where vikalpa attachment is happening. Utpaladeva, working within Trika, interprets this role of mind. The argument turns into a paradigmatic reversal, which is the ordinary source of the bondage, bandhaka. The mind is not inherently so. This involves all our ripus and all our emotions and everything, the senses, the perceptive forces, because the mind is extended to our antakaranas, which involves our senses, guchari, gochari, dikchari, all of this. They're using the words. They are not exactly seen as the things that bind you to this world, but unaware of them, like unaware of their true nature, is what makes you think that their senses or cognitive functions, which make you separate from the object and the subject. But once one knows the essential nature, it becomes one. So he basically argues that it is directionally determines the function. When the mind is directed outward, as in seeing this as something, then the multiplicity and egoistic appropriation arrives, and it indeed binds. But when it is infused with pure devotion, love, as in devotion, as in the experience of the ecstasy and experiencing all these experiences, like you might be going through a pain while talking, but that itself, the pain itself is absorbed into just a revelation of the same consciousness, and the very experience of the pain, the process of the experience of the pain is absorbed into pain. The resultant oneness that is happening is actually giving you an intense ecstasy, which is nothing other than the state of devotive devotion. So this transformation becomes something that ultimately leads you to samavesha, that is again absorption into that. So then duality and like bhakti itself becomes as a form of this. Now the question comes of Swatantra. So Swatantra Vijaya, when we argues of this, the question is, in Bhakti, we often say that we surrender to the goddess or the god. And the Swatantra, the very core idea of independence as the essential nature of the self, might be argued that your independence is disregarded and your free will is disregarded. Now, the general argument is that does Swatantra remain in the state of Bhakti? Now, this is the argument. So, the question is, a central tension in non-dual philosophies like Pratyabhijñā is accounting for the necessity of the liberation when the self Atman or Chaitanya is already present. Unchanging and the self-revealing consciousness is always the substratum of all experience. And not truly lost or absent. Then why does it require realization? What is the nature of the bondage if the bound subject is already identical with Shiva? The Swatantra Vijaya is it's a sloka of Utpaladeva from Shiva Stotra. Well, he resolves this paradox by introducing the concept of dual powers, that is Tirodhana Shakti and Unmesha Shakti. Now, Tirodhana Shakti is what is much like Maya. These are not external mechanisms imposed upon the self, but intrinsic modalities of Swatantra. Now, consciousness by its own will, it says that it comes down, and they also explain this yoga. It comes, the very idea of Swatantra is to be capable of becoming in bondage willingly, and again going out of bondage willingly. Like you intentionally play yourself as someone in bondage. A person who is in Sahasa Jnanam, that is a sudden flash of recognition, realizes that it is Anugraha Shakti which is revealing himself as one as Shiva. But at the same, liberation is not an acquisition of something new or the overcoming of an ontological separation. Rather, it is a cessation of misrecognition. So it is a sudden flash of recognition, which is in which the obscured self becomes self-luminous. This is the spontaneous manifestation of the already present truth, brought forth through the grace of Shiva. As toKṣemarāja glosses, it is not the cognitive construction, but an act of self-disclosure, swaprakash. It is a willing, full disclosure of the consciousness. Thus, the need for liberation arises not because the self is absent, but because it is present, it's obscured by its own power of concealment. The solution is not to add knowledge from outside, but to dissolve the obscuration that prevents the self from recognition of itself. So Bhakti is argued that Bhakti itself becomes a privileged royal means of this unveiling, because it supplies what is missing. Now, the argument is again going that if you basically take over just jnana, it is somewhere dry, but it is bhakti which makes it full of rasa and enjoyable. So pain becomes enjoyable, your doubts become dissolved. Ontological status of Maya. Whether is it a mere obstruction or second reality, the Tirodhana Shakti. The second verse of Swatantra Vijaya addresses this issue, and whether the duality as limits to consciousness or it is a dependent phenomenon lacking the substance and standing only through misrecognition. The Stotra clearly takes later position. Maya is not described as a force external to Shiva or consciousness, but as a chaya, shadow. It is neither co-external with Shiva, nor it is nor an ontologically autonomous power. Rather, it is a transient obstruction lacking ashattva, real existent on its own right. Like a shadow appears real only through the absence of light, or it is a case of knowledge. The true nature of consciousness is recognized when Maya loses its power and dissolves through the destruction of the not through destruction but through illumination. So what Maya basically does is like it does a vikshepa, that is, it projects the limiting kanchukas and limits the self in time, space, and others. And when the illumination, when the realization comes, one goes simply beyond this idamta, and Maya basically takes over. What was Maya doing is there are two aspects. One is the pure subjective aspect of ahamta, and one is the objective aspect of idamta. Now this idamta takes prominence and starts projecting itself as an objective subject where I am identified as Swastik and everyone as the speakers. And naturally the object also appears others. Now, because it helps us transgress the idamta, it becomes. So this insight, Utpaladeva informs that Maya infinity. Consequently, liberation is not a metaphysical consequent or some real adversary, nor a dualistic flight from some alien force. It is the correction of vision, an epistemic rectification of pramatri, pramana, prameya, sambandha, vimarsha, which is the object, the subject, and the process of recognition, and the very awareness of them being one is being corrected. And by overcoming this, thus the Maya and the illusion of otherness dissolve. Now the world becomes an expression. Now there is this Tat Marichi Sambandha that is taken up. This Tat Marichi Sambandha has two aspects. So the word Marichi basically involves the rays of the sun, and also it involves the casting of the illusion. So when we take the reference of the what is the nature of the bhuvana, because it comes into it when the bhakta sees the world, he does not see the world as something separate standing, but he sees it as one as Shiva. They do not see it as prapancha, yet the expression of the world comes. So does it actually bond? What is the status of the bhakta in the world? So it is like the radiation, because that bhakta is seeing the radiation of that one Shiva projecting itself as many, while being static in that is what is happening. And it is a playful Marichi. So what happens? The world, Bhuvana is not a fetter, but an outward pulsation of Unmesha, consciousness. It's the opening of the eye. So it's like a revelation or an unfluttering of the consciousness. The yogin, instead of rejecting the phenomena, absorbs themselves as manifestations of the self. Now the problem comes, because when we are talking about these things, constantly this absorption into this one pure ahamta is coming. Does this identification of Shivatva, I am Shiva, or Bhairavoham, Shivoham, or even saying that it is that extension, does it actually involve an ego? And when we talk about the ego, it actually dissolves us into again solipsism, whether it is mine and everything that is coming. And or is it something else? So one of the major objections is then, so Utpaladeva's assertion of Shivoham on the surface may seem like an instance of egoistic inflection, the ontological hubris that collapse into solipsism. If an individual claims the absolute selfhood, this is the problem that we often find when we discuss Trika without this bhakti. Such a reading would profoundly will be is a misunderstanding of the doctrine, and this is where bhakti plays a role. I am Shiva is not an assertion of empirical supremacy, but that ecstatic dissolution of the ego, the dissolution of the ego into wire, the limited Khudraham, the small self, defined by finitude, is dissolved into the great cosmic fire of recognition. So analogy may be broad. The small self is like an ice, and it is dissolving in the ocean. So when the dissolution happens in the ocean, the small self again finds itself in that ocean as a reflection. But this, like I'm bringing up these analogies, let me be very honest with you. I don't know if they're there in the text. So when it melts in that, and then identified with this absolute state of consciousness where your individual identity is lost, now this individual identity is again reconstructed. And there's this word of abhimana used, as KSAS explains, is not an egoistic, but a devotional. So it's like an abhiman again is a word that is a sort of an emotional ego, like I will create myself to experience myself in as an other within that oneness of the consciousness, just to be in one with that. So sangrahena shukadukham lakshana ma pratishthitam, I'm just knowing what in the sloka, like sokhamesa bhavata samagama swamina viraha eva dukkhita. So when I am merged in the state of consciousness, it is the state of my sukha. So it's like all the pains also appear as sukha. But when I am in a viraha, this viraha is being unaware of this constant state of merged in this Shiva consciousness, even in pain. Now, this question comes very important. Even in pain, one is merged in this state of consciousness. You don't see the pain or the experience of the pain as something other. It's very easy to be identified in pleasure. But they see that it is a revelation of this consciousness or a revelation of the nataka that is happening, the play of revelation, and whether you can accept it or not. And the Vira Bhava play is very important, where you absorb yourself till you establish yourself in that state that, okay, this second that I am experiencing is actually nothing but Shiva. So the things that are not really like acceptable ultimately gets dissolved into Shiva, and there you also get dissolved, and then again you find yourself as a reflection within Shiva. So this identification of Abhimana, as KSAS explains, is not egoistic but devotional. It is an assertion of independence, that independence to the recognition of independence, where you can yourself be identified and absorbed in Shiva entirely, and you can willingly, by through Swatantra, come down and reveal yourself as a material individual person while revealing the world as Shiva. So this entire ability to be multiple at the same time as one is what comes into this. The mode of, so it becomes just the bhakti itself is, now what happens for rasas in bhakti, because there are so many rasas being discussed of Karuna rasa, Rudra rasa, and all these rasas. Like when we discuss the story of Karala Bhairava and Krodha Bhairava, it comes into the question of being very restricted in his own practice, and then the very idea of Krodha Bhairava would bring in the idea of Rudra rasa. So what is it that ultimately brings the argument of bhakti into the what sort of rasa would be taking place? So the argument taken up over here is that the elevation of bhakti from preparatory is the highest form of liberation. In doing so, like the argument is basically, it basically is the Shanta Rasha, which is the underlying Rasha of everything. And that is what which is manifesting. So being a Jnani, he does not, like bhakti may seen as an opposition to Jnana. Now this Rasa play is where the Jnani brings the argument in. The Jnani would be arguing that his, like the liberated being, Jnani, does not renounce devotion as something to be left behind, but his devotion is even deeper, because without a driven lack of separation, this is where the Ichcha and the desire comes in, but arise, the fullness of recognition will not come, and the fullness of Swatantra will also not come. Unlike Jnana, which operates solely conceptually and maintains epistemic subject-object distinction, unlike Siddhi, over here, like, and then dissolution, which relies upon the subtle form of volition, bhakti is marked by collapse of duality in lived experience. Anything? Oh. So this lived experience, and it is Shiva revealing himself to himself is what. So the liberated being is not less devotional, but infinitely more so, because he experiences every arising moment as an appearance of Shiva revealing himself as himself through the heart of the devotee, heart being the center of the consciousness, which is the devotee. So he becomes the very center of the experience, where it is thus redefined that the bhakti is not otherness based on longing, but a self-intimacy experienced as grace, a luminous blend of knowledge, presence, and active. Now, this process is what requires the jnana, and this is where the Paurusha jnana comes. And it is something that is triggered by the role of the Guru Parampara, so it happens. This mark of realization is aesthetic and not ascetic. So, stark concept to the ascetic idea where one has to leave the world, and to seek the Brahman, one must leave the world and the social life. And after having Nitya Anitya Viveka must perfume Vairagya so that they do not get latched to the worldly things first. The Kaula Tantra, and even in Kashmir Shaivism, just the opposite is taken up. And they say that the Siddhi is not by leaving the world, and they don't consider it to be a Siddha at all, because you will again be redirected to the world. But it is the experience of the aesthetic where the liberation is there. And this is where bhakti comes the very experience of ecstasy. The liberated being is not emptied of emotion, but flooded with the highest refinement. The aesthetic emotive flavor of non-dual recognition is far from being an external. The positive epistemological and ontological marketing of liberation. In Bhakti Vilasa, Shiva, Utpaladeva describes the devotee as trembling with tears and at the same time having ecstatic outbursts while trembling with tears. But these are not signs of immaturity, but a spontaneous manifestation of the divine overflowing. And all the emotive body that is seen as the other, the worldly expressions, the very nitya viveka that is here, is actually transfigured into the experience of this one whole consciousness, where the rejection is not needed, but being absorption in the divine of the other is needed. So it's a continuation of the rasa argument, from misrecognition to aesthetic recognition. So as the one, it's the same argument again and again. So they have a radical.
Yeah, please wind up because we are already ahead of time.
Yeah, okay. So now the Akhanda Akridananda collapse of duality, where the cry of non-dual recognition comes. So it is the distinction between the seer and the seen is erased. Because in Bhakti, where the ground of submersion happens, is on the ground of you, where the Madhyam Purusha comes. In this Madhyama Purusha, this Akhanda Kada Vritti happens, where the individual is merged into the you, and the world is merged into the you. Just like a person who is in deep love does not see anything other than a lover, so there's a person who is absorbed in bhakti does not see anything as Shiva. And in that state of absorption and in that melting of this absolute consciousness, does he again find this everything? So, therefore, this Shakti, which it is the revelation of oneself as Shakti, which becomes a very offering of themselves to universe. Thus, for a bhakta, there is neither like a paradox of question of whether bhakti can be non-dual or not. Yes, it can be. And whether the question of puja and others come into it, because yes, it is, because you are identified with the Shakti, and puja or para puja, your entire existence becomes an offering. So that's it. There are many more arguments. So yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Swastik. And despite being suffering from fever and cold, you have given a wonderful talk. So now the talk is open for discussion and questionnaire round.
I could not see Rakesh sir. Is he here?
Just a minute. Oh, he left.
Yeah. I think Swamiji
he was
is
there. Yeah. I think he left.
Okay.
Yeah, if you have any questions, anyone of you, kindly ask. I can see many new names. Bharat sir, Aniket Mehrotra, so many new.
Swami Srihari Prasad ji is here.
Yeah, huh?
Swami Srihari Prasad ji is here.
Acha.
Yes, Swastik, I'm very happy to. I'm not able to put on my camera now, but I'm very happy that hear your talk and very proud of you. Very good presentation, and you are as usual very clear and very crisp in your explanations. So I'm very happy and thank you for a very good talk. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Swastik, I have one query. I mean, because I'm not a scholar or I have very limited knowledge about this Kashmiri Shaivism, but in your presentation, when you talk about devotion, so is consciousness is the revelation of Shiva within an individual, or consciousness itself is Shiva during the conscious devotion.
So in
Is it
devotion,
so?
what's happening, there are two things happening. The pure consciousness, as in consciousness in pure form, is Shiva. Okay, so you find the individual within consciousness.
Okay.
The individual is something that is experienced within consciousness as an object, of course, like as something that is located within consciousness. And this bhakti, in what happens in bhakti is the idea of ecstasy is all the emotions that come, like all the emotions that are associated with experience, the rasas that come, is what starts to express itself.
So,
the
Shiva and consciousness, are they?
Yeah, they identify Shiva, consciousness as Shiva.
They are okay. So there is a difference between that Sankhya, Purusha and this Shiva, right?
Yes, it's actually very close to your phenomenology.
Yeah,
You have to
that's
think
why
like
I'm asking.
consciousness is intentional. So the consciousness here is aware of the pure minimal subjectivity. Now, if this minimal subject becomes a clear objective subject, then it is an ego. Now, when you get absorbed in this minimal pure subjectivity, like it would end up in solipsism if I say like this, but we have to forget that it's not our consciousness we're talking about. And if we go beyond that subjectivity, and it has to be about something, it is always reflexive in nature. So it is, what is it about? So this is ahamta, that is this I.
About is devotion, right?
No, like the experience of this becomes a sort of devotion. When you become aware, the ecstasy that you have from that awareness is something that comes out as devotion.
Okay. It's very interesting. So,
is this being recorded?
Yeah. It is live on YouTube. I will send the link.
Yeah.
So I would request our institute's president, Professor Balram Singh sir, to give his feedback.
Sure.
Pranam sir. Yeah.
Pranam. I'm sorry I was a little bit late because of a phone call, and I did see your message a little bit later also, and I had not remembered the date. So my apologies. But my bhakti is strong enough to join. So I think the fact that Swastik, you said you had fever and cold, or it is only his bhakti that is able to do all this great work. His bhakti to his work. So I don't know that much philosophy. I just am learning. But the word bhakti, just like you were talking about, phenomenology or experience, it's all very individual. Different people come from different perspective. So whether it's Kashmir Saivism or South Indian, whatever the system they have, it comes from their experience, and the communication is the key. So I'm a chemist. I always like to see everything through chemistry, but I don't see philosophy through chemistry. I'm trying to see if Sipra and Alok and others will be teaching me philosophy through chemistry, and maybe they will. But so in the meantime, Swastik, I'm just going to use your word bhakti and do a chemistry of bhakti. So the word, I love to do all this. Even though I'm wrong, it doesn't matter because I'm wrong, at least I learn. Bhakti word comes from, bhog, how you bhakshan karte hain, bhakshan bhi hota hai uska naam, and bhog karna.
Chadvana is used over here. You chew it.
So you chew it. Yeah, that's okay. So chew it. But there are different types of bhakshan. So there are some people who do bhog, and they will sit on the table, they will say some mantras also, and then they will put some food for a dog or cow or something. That's the one way of doing it. Some people will, do some bhajan, and then they will eat it. And on the other hand, this also means bhakshan, somebody who will eat whatever they get, however they get, they will steal it also from somebody. So then this kind of has your concept. Whether you call it Shiva or you call it Brahma or whatever you want to call, because I remember learning about Om Brahmarpanam Brahmavi Brahmagno Brahmanavutam. So everything is the food. Like, so it kind of, I just see that, living in America, doing science and doing many other things, and traveling to have friends all over the world, I just see everybody the same. They just have their way of describing it. And I love the philosophers' approach to it. They kind of delineate, you just told that to Sipra, but your phenomenology also comes in here. So she's allowed to have her phenomenology, but you're happy to integrate it or associate it. It is really a lovely thing for philosophers to do, because they can make sense out of things that otherwise people might just have experience, but they don't know how to communicate that. So I think it came out beautifully, and I hope that you said, I just read your thing. You are still submitted your PhD, or
No, I am trying to do my pre-submission first and then submit.
Oh, okay. So the University of Calcutta, there is a person by the name of what Misra, his name is, Sanskrit. She's, I think, head of the department.
Now I won't know them.
Okay, maybe you should look into that, and maybe I will visit.
Dashgupta, I think, right now.
No, he's Misra, some Misra. Right now, his name is Misra is only coming. He's the head of the Sanskrit department, and recently he had some big 1 week long, I think, like whole day long conference.
Yes.
I also presented in that one. Maybe someday I will visit, and maybe you can help people like that also a little bit about the philosophy, because if without philosophy things don't get organized. I guess.
Sir, is it Kamal Kishore Mishra?
Kamal Kishore, yeah. Kamal Kishore Mishra.
Kamal Kishore Mishra.
Yeah, you may be knowing him.
Yeah, I've heard of him. I don't know him personally.
I mean, he's so far we only talked about bhog and bhakti and bhakchad and different types. But he and I have opposite view, but he still invited me to write introduction to his book. I wrote opposite of what he had written, but I told him that I have opposite view. Then he said he wanted me to write, and so I really have admiration for him. So he's somebody who can take opposite view also, and still wants to be part of that book. He's written a book on, I think it's a Vidyottama. He's writing a book on Vidyottama, and his basic theory is to attribute all the things that Kalidas did, including Kashmir Saivism. People say that Kalidas learned that you are interested in or you're talking about. He said that his view is that it was all written by Vidyottama, his wife, and Indian tradition is to defer to husband, so she put his name out of respect. I differ with that, and I also differ with the fact that everybody thinks all over the world. Actually, I had a good meeting with my good friend who is a parapsychologist about, if you are sitting on the same branch and cutting the same, you are the biggest fool. So all over the world, this is considered. And so anyway, that's why Kalidas is considered as a fool, Vidyottama is wise, and that's written. And I wrote opposite, because I'm from a village. I can climb on the tree and cut the same branch and be smart, because I can do a smart thing, a smart way. I can jump from the tree. I can go the other side. I can do all kind of stuff. So anyway, my comment about bhakti, bhokti, bhakshan, bhog, all this thing is all connected. Depends on where we are, how we are. So I wish you all the best. It was a wonderful presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And thank you, Mr. Swastik Banerjee. And we wish you all the best for your submission. And we would love to listen to you as a Dr. Swastik Banerjee once again in our cafe. So till then, namaste. And thank you, everyone. Please join us next month on 21st of August. We will announce the speaker's name very soon.
Normally, yes. Sipra, when somebody says, and I would like to invite everybody. So we're inviting for next month, right? Normally here,
Yes,
people, and I will now invite you all to have a cup of tea with us.
yes.
I have mine.
See, yeah,
So we should have a culture of
I have
everybody have a,
class.
everybody has a cup of whatever, they want to have. And
Yes,
and then we should join in chatting, where nobody listens to nobody, everybody only talks. If we open everybody's audio. Just kidding. Just giving crazy ideas.
That is actually a good
Okay.
idea.
Good idea, yeah.
Yeah, why not? Why not? All right. Take care.
Okay, sir. Okay, Swastik.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Namaste.
Namaste.